Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, how can we balance the needs of employees with the demands of the organization? How do we navigate the tension between short term wins and long term sustainability? And how do we balance tried and tested ways of doing things while embracing innovative approaches for the future? These are just some of the few polarities that we face every day in our personal and professional lives. Instead of seeing these as opposing forces, as conflicts to resolve, what if we viewed these as dynamic tensions to leverage? In a world that often pushes us towards either or thinking, we miss the opportunities hidden within the interplay of opposites. So today, we're exploring the field of polarity intelligence and how to move beyond quick fixes that fail and binary solutions and instead achieve much more productive outcomes. Now, polarity thinking or polarity intelligence is something that Danny and I have wanted to cover since the start of the OrgDev podcast, but we have been searching for the perfect guest to talk about it because this is an important way in which we need to support leaders in organizations. Then I came across a brilliantly written book called Polarity Intelligence, The Missing Logic in Leadership by Dr. Tracy Christopherson and Michelle Troseth. So Tracy and Michelle met over 30 years ago and have been collaborative colleagues and dynamic co-leaders ever since. Together, they co-founded MissingLogic to bring together polarity intelligence. Now, Tracy is a respiratory therapist. She earned a PhD in interprofessional healthcare studies and has helped thousands of individuals and leaders apply polarity intelligence in their quest to create healthy, healing, collaborative work cultures and environments. And Michelle is a nurse and a recognized global thought leader and the past president of the National Academies of Practice and a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. Now, Tracy and Michelle work as consultants and coaches in the healthcare field, which is such a fascinating area. They are master dialogue facilitators, experts in organizational and interprofessional council infrastructures. They both live in Michigan. As best friends, they share a love of travel, golf, and have especially their epic, and I can't pronounce this, Ukra matches with their husband's steering game.
Euchre.
Euchre. The card game.
Is it really? Does it involve money?
No.
Okay. And that's why you're still friends.
Not when we play it.
And Danny and I are really excited because we know that by the end of this session, you're going to be really introduced to the idea of polarity intelligence, but with a real joy and warmth that only Tracy and Michelle can bring. So welcome so much to the podcast.
We're really excited to have you with us, so thank you for joining us. So just to kick us off, just tell us a little bit about polarity intelligence and polarity thinking, kind of define it for the audience who might not have come across it as a concept first.
Polarity intelligence has really three components to it. One is the polarity mindset piece, another is healthy relationships, and the other is meaningful dialogue. So it's really the three together that enable leaders to leverage the polarities in their, in all aspects of their lives, personally, professionally, in their organizations, in their communities, wherever we're leaders. Now, polarities, let's just start there, right? Polarities are interdependent pairs of perspectives, points of view, or values. They appear to be opposite or contradictory to each other, but they have this interdependent relationship and they need each other to get to a greater purpose. So the example of that's easiest for everybody to understand that we use all the time is inhaling and exhaling. Of course, this is near and dear to my heart as a respiratory therapist, right? So my favorite example. But, when you inhale, there's a benefit to that, right? You receive oxygen. And when you exhale, there's a benefit to that in removing the carbon dioxide from your body. And your body has to do both, right? In harmony and in synchrony in order to reach the greater purpose of sustaining life. And all other polarities are just like that, right? There's benefits to each pole, and you need the benefits of those poles to get to the greater purpose. And if you overemphasize one and you neglect the other, there's always going to be a negative consequence. The thing is, most people don't even know these polarities exist, right? They experience the tension between the two poles, but they don't understand the nature of the energy that binds these two components together. And so they fight against it. And they use kind of their go-to methodology, which is problem solving, right? We grow up learning how to solve problems from the time we're young in school. And then as we're leaders, right, the more problems, the bigger the problems we solve, the more accolades we get, the higher we climb in the organization. And it really is our go-to. So polarity mindsets, understanding what a polarity is and how it works, and then differentiating those from the problems that we can solve. But it's that sitting in that tension because they appear to be contradictory to each other that can cause challenges for people. So that's why we've coupled that with healthy relationships and meaningful dialogue. And I'll let Michelle talk a little bit about those two components.
We recognize you could know about polarities, but you can't stop there, because like, what do you do when you're sitting in that tension? And so it's really important to recognize the importance of really fostering healthy relationships with other people and really being intentional on how we connect with the people that we live with, the people we work with, the people in our community, and establish that shared purpose. Why does the relationship exist in the first place? And recognizing that we all have an equal responsibility in that. And together we can explore these tensions together and really tap the human capacity in each and every person in the organization. And we also, in that healthy relationships too, a really important aspect is balancing yourself in that relationship. It's another almost mini polarity, but if you're going to have a healthy relationship, you have to find that dynamic balance between you and others that you work with or that you live with. And then that all of that sits and creates trust. And you have to have a strong foundation in relationships to really build upon, to deepen your understanding of polarities. And then Tracy and I, we studied dialogue for years. We created dialogue experiences, dialogue circles. And so we realized if we're really going to create polarity intelligence, leaders have to be skilled at dialogue. And this is a lot different than learning about communication, your business class, or this is going deeper to really understand, and again, being intentional with people, creating a container of psychological safety so that you can explore the tensions that are always there, maybe the ones that are most prominent that you really need to address as well. And then also listening. That is the biggest skill set that we see missing in leaders, is really listening to understand another person's perspective, and then being curious, right? If we have tensions, tell me why you think that way. How did you come to have that particular preference of that pole, as an example? And being candid and diplomatic with each other, changing the way we do have conversations together, and really inviting reflection so that we can learn together, both at a personal level, but also collectively as a group. So we recognize polarities are everywhere. They're never going to go away, but leaders also need the skill sets to navigate them and to really kind of raise above them so that you really can create these really good workplaces. And so those are the three, that's the trifecta.
And has polarity thinking and polarity intelligence, does it take on more significance the more complicated and complex the world we're kind of operating in? Do you think it's more relevant today than it ever has been?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I think, we just keep experiencing the same challenges over and over because they're polarities.
Yeah.
Right. They're not problems to solve, but we keep coming at them from that problem solving lens and trying to find the solution. Right. What is the solution to this challenge?
Yeah.
And I mean, we just face this in the States, right? With our election, and we've got such polarization. It's so deep. And why that happens is because these are values. They're deeply held values that are so meaningful for us. And what people don't understand is you don't have to give up what you value to be open and receptive to the other value, because we have to have them both. But most people hang on tightly because they feel like they have to give theirs up to accept or be open to the other. But when you know it's a polarity, then you know it's both and. It's never about either or. It's always about both and. So, and one pole is not more important than the other. But
Right.
because we don't understand this concept and how all polarities work, we continue to fight against it. And it just gets more and more complex. And there are a multitude of polarities. They're everywhere, right? And so the more complex our world gets, the more polarities there are at play that are not being addressed. They're not being leveraged.
Where do leaders start? So if leaders kind of are hearing us talking about polarities, how do they start the process of starting to work with polarities rather than problems? How do you set them off on that path?
Well, I would say they start at the personal level. We always start leaders at the personal level. So because that's closest to home and it's easiest to manage, because you're leveraging your own actions, your own polarities, right? They sit with you. So as an example, for most leaders, professional life and personal life is a primary polarity that they face every single day, right? They give a lot to their profession, to their career, right, as a leader. And yet they want to have a thriving personal life at the same time. That's equally important to them. So we start them with really mapping out, what is it that I truly want in my career and my professional life, and what matters most to me in my personal life, and really understanding what those are, what those elements are, what are the benefits I get when I give attention to both of these, and what's at risk. If I work too hard in my career, developing my career, and I neglect my personal life, what is at risk, right? And what's at risk if I give too much attention to my personal life? And then what are the strategies? So they create their own action plan, right? It's a blueprint strategy for having this balance between both and being able to recognize the warning signs of when they are over focusing. So when they can leverage that at a personal level, they get a deep understanding not only of what a polarity is, but how they work, what it takes to leverage one. And then they feel more confident in themselves and their ability to talk to others about polarities. And it also helps them deepen their relationships, because you don't live in that polarity alone. You got a family, you got people, team members you're working with, right? You got a lot of other people that are impacted. And most of the time, they're the ones that can tell you, what your warning signs are. They know when you're stressed out. They know when you're overemphasizing. It's great, so it's the exercise of also who else can support me in leveraging this. And what kind of relationship do I need with that person? How can I deepen my relationship, and how can I communicate my needs and what I'm trying to do, and have a deeper understanding about, it's not just about me, it's about the ripple effect this has on others, right? And that shared purpose of support. So we always find it's helpful to start at the personal level.
And then Danny, I would add to that, that's why we wrote the book too.
Mm.
How do I learn more about this? And there's been a lot of books written on polarities that are like theoretical. They're hard to apply. So our intention with writing this book was to create like a guidebook for any leader. It's written in a very simplistic way. It gives you key reflection questions. It gives you actual tips. There's case studies in it. And because we really want to get it in the hands as many leaders as we can. So it was written in a very specific way. And then we also created a website, polarityintelligence.com, where when leaders read the book and we refer them to the website, they can download tools and resources, because we want people to start thinking, how can I apply this? How can I learn this? So that was a big reason behind our book.
And it's not enough just to know it. A lot of people have
Yes.
written books on polarities and polarity thinking, but it's about the application.
Obviously, seeing the polarity is only half the work, isn't it? But it's a significant piece, isn't it? Because once you see one polarity, you see them everywhere, don't you? And you talk about the importance of being able to engage others in you talk about meaningful dialogue, which is really important. And it is an underappreciated thing in this world, particularly for leaders. But you talk about one of the things that are really important is that you develop the importance of developing a shared commitment to a greater purpose. So when two people are talking, what did you mean by that concept, and how can people apply that?
Again, because we can be so polarized to our preference pole, we often find, though, that we all want the same thing. So coming together to really identify what that shared purpose is, and that happens through dialogue. It happens through listening to each other. It happens when you can feel safe to even express your perspective. Sometimes people don't even know why they came to believe something that they believe. They've been indoctrinated by other people or other things. And so it's really creating that space where we can come together and identify the shared purpose. And what we have found pretty consistently, then we can actually see the benefits, the positive outcomes of the other perspective, and work together to really have action to support both of those, so we can achieve that higher purpose. So you have to have dialogue skills to get there.
One of the things that I think we've done is help people to see they can create a space, like it's stepping out of the day to day. We get in these meetings, it's rapid fire, we're problem focused. What's the solution? What's the next step? How's it working? What it's not working? What's the next thing we can try? And dialogue is about stepping away. It's about slowing the conversation down. It's about being present with each other. It's not about finding a solution. It's like having a fire in the center of a circle, and everybody is contributing a log to the fire, right? So everybody contributes from their perspective. here's my experience I've had with this. We did this with a large group of leaders and just exploring, what do I know about, engaging with people that have diverse perspectives. That's just a topic. What have I learned about that? What do I know about that? And everybody has had different experiences, but it's through everybody sharing those experiences that we get a deeper meaning, we get a deeper understanding, we start to open up, right? We relate to each other differently. We relate to the topic that we're talking about differently. So it's really just that safe space to share and to learn from each other, so that you're kind of always moving up towards, oh, well, this is what we all want. We've had different experiences, but this is what this really means. And coming to that collective understanding, that deeper understanding. But it's not about solving anything. We tend to get in, right?
I just noticed you've got yin yang
Yeah.
earrings on. You are living your truth, aren't you?
Oh yeah, pretty much
I
every
love
day.
it.
That's one of the biggest polarities there is.
Because you're fighting the brain's natural instincts, aren't you? Because we are so naturally disposed to them and us. And, the fact that we're kind of sort of saying, we want facts that are going to prove our point are true. You're with the same as we get called into lots of conflicts. And obviously, from our view, it all makes sense. And they are fighting over the same thing, but they lose their way in the conflict, don't they? And it becomes literally a point of my point will prevail. So I guess you're trying to introduce a different type of space and slow things down.
Yeah. And just to be present with each other, right? And I think the thing is to recognize the preferences. So I'm glad, we've kind of talked a little bit about that, but we all have preference, and most of the time it's based on the experiences that we've had, right? And so it's just really important to know, when you have a polarity and you have a preference for a pole, you're going to lean that way, and that's what you're going to kind of hang on to a little bit more. And oftentimes it's just the awareness of that I need to open myself up a little bit more to the other side. So as an example, we were talking about yin and yang, right? One of the energies is masculine and feminine. Now, I have a higher masculine energy, right? I'm a doer, right? Achiever, like that. And Michelle is more the feminine energy. So she's more in the relationships and the connection. And doesn't mean I don't appreciate those things, but I tend to lean this way. She tends to lean that way. Right? And so it's just important to know and understand that when we get into situations, so that we can have a good balance of both, because both are essential in leadership, in everything, right? Like it's an energy that you need to leverage and manage, but you just have to know what your preferences are, because it drives how you see things, how you interpret things, and where you put your emphasis. And so as a leader, if you have a preference pool, everybody you lead can live in the downside of that preference. If I have a preference for directive decision making, then that's what I'm doing, right? And everybody that lives underneath me in the organization is going to live underneath my preference pool. If I don't balance that with participative decision making, we're going to all end up in the downside of that, right? There's going to be a negative consequence. But because I'm the leader and that's my preference, if I just sit in that pool, I can drive us into that downside if it's not balanced well with participative decision making, as an example.
So you talked about people often confusing problems with polarity, so they'll think they've got a problem to fix rather than looking at. What are the signs that we might be working with a polarity rather than a problem? Are there things we can look out for that might point us in the direction?
Well, problems have endpoints. So you have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 possible solutions that you can apply. You choose one, you apply it, problem solved, it's done. In a polarity, there's the solutions or the alternatives that you have an interdependent relationship to them. You can't choose one or the other, and the polarity is always ongoing. So it never ends. It always is going to continue. And that's a sign that you have a polarity, when you have what you think is a problem that comes back over and over and over. Then you know that this is not a problem, this is a polarity, because it keeps repeating itself. Whatever, it doesn't matter what we apply, we never solve it. That's how you know you have a polarity, is because it's ongoing all the time.
A lot of what you're introducing to organizations is kind of, for many organizations, it's countercultural, isn't it? Because it's kind of win-win. It's, there's a lot of emphasis, particularly in some organizations, about individual achievement. And one of the things that, you talk about is the fact that you're trying to see the upsides in both. How do you create that safety or that different type of space where people can engage in that type of conversation? What are some of the building blocks you need to do to enable people to engage in the dialogue that's required to be able to even discuss these things?
I think you have to prioritize creating that space. And sometimes that can be a challenge in organizations that are quick fix mentality focused, but it's really critical that you do that. And so that's why Tracy and I also like to work with leaders, because leaders are the ones, they're the linchpins of the organization. So if they don't understand how important this is, then the people on the front line aren't going to have a chance, right? So how we're doing it is obviously teaching people about it, but also after the book came out, we did a 2-day foundations program where we actually took 2 days, brought leaders from different organizations, industries in, and gave them the experience of how to create that space, what it was like to be in a dialogue. And then that's when the light bulbs go off. And so then organizations start to prioritize if they are committed to become polarity intelligent leaders themselves, or they're like, I want to create this type of culture in my organization, then we need to take that time to step back, to come together and to have dialogue, and so that can really appreciate other people's differing perspectives. But we also I think it's also even important to create the space to identify where your team's preference pools are out. That's enlightening in and of itself, because if you take any polarity, and one that Tracy and I frequently help people with in learning about it, is stability and change in the world today, and what's your preference pool. And you can learn a lot about a group very quickly about where they stand, if they prefer change or they prefer stability. But you have to take time to create space, or you might be in the middle of a meeting, there's tension, practice calling it out, and then take the time to identify what are we dealing with here, and then to have conversation about it. I think the first is just recognizing how important it is that we do slow down and we have these conversations, and we take the time to identify and talk through what polarities we might be dealing with.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think it's about commitment. And I think it does start with a leadership, like Michelle said, but it's a commitment that, you know what, these exist, they're everywhere, they're working on us. Number one, recognize that and embrace it. And then identify, where is it showing up for us the most? Because, there's a lot of polarities. It can get really overwhelming to think that we're going to manage all of these at the same time. But, the first place they start out at is really in the strategic plan. Because if we're unipolar in our thinking, right, then we're going to end up, what we're doing is not going to be a sustainable outcome if we don't have both values represented in our strategic plans, in our vision for our organization, right, in our mission. So we have to think about it. It starts right at the top with, kind of the foundation of the organization. And then to recognize, we need leaders that can lead this. So we work with organizations to create resource teams. We don't want people to be dependent on us. We want them to be self-sufficient in this. So it's really about, get a team together. Let's get the team together that can kind of hold this container and move the organization forward in the learning and the development of this skill, and start with the leaders and then ripple it out to everybody, because everybody should understand what a polarity is, how it's showing up, because understanding that gives them a common language. Oh, this isn't a problem. This is a polarity. And we love it when that happens, right? And people will ping us and go, oh my gosh, I was in this meeting the other day and I thought, oh, this is a polarity, right?
It's so true. It's literally, right? It's one of the most cathartic tools we like, for helping people make sense. They go like, oh,
yeah,
it all makes sense.
Yeah.
And you just see people's shoulders go, oh, okay.
Yeah. So once you have that awareness, it's really just making the commitment. This isn't, I think, this isn't one of our biggest frustrations, is this isn't nice to know, folks. This isn't just nice to know. This is a universal law. It's a principle. It impacts every aspect of your life and every element that you engage in your communities, your nation, doesn't matter, right? Your organization, your leadership teams, your groups. It's not a nice to know. It's happening around you. It's working on you. So if you don't understand how to work with it, it's going to work you and your organization, right? And the most successful organizations recognize and leverage the key polarities in their organization. And so it's a key competency for every leader. And we're all leaders. We're all leaders, right? In some way, shape, or form. Some of us have formal leadership positions and others of us don't, but we're leading. We're always leading. People are always watching and observing you. And so that's why we wrote this really kind of for any leader in any way, in your community or your organization, doesn't matter, right, where you're leading, in your family.
There were two things I just wanted to pick up. We're going to just ask you about like how you came across this, and I know that's going to be a fascinating story. But just two things I want to pull out. You talked about strategy, and it's really interesting. So, like this morning, we were talking to an organisation that's embarking on a huge strategic process, and we sort of went through it, and it became all of a sudden that they're trying to get their managers to achieve two polarities, but without being explicit. So they want them to be innovative and efficient, and those are two big, very different things to do, but they're not necessarily making it explicit on and how they're going to do it. Is that something that you see where the organizations are getting their to do very contradictory things?
Yeah. Or they're emphasizing the innovation, or they just overemphasize the innovation and they don't pay attention to the tradition. What is the core of who we are, how we operate, like who we want to be, what we want to contribute?
Yeah.
They get in the downside. Maybe that's not going so well, right? And then they overemphasize the innovation.
Yeah.
And they neglect to maintain the core.
That's right.
A lot of companies have, gone under because they went, they either held on to the core and didn't innovate, or they went too far in the innovation and lost the core.
Same thing with efficiency. Another common polarity in organizations is they over-focus on the efficiency and their productivity, but they're not paying attention to the relationships and the connections within the organization. Another 100% predictable failure if they don't leverage those two things. Actually, looking at strategic plans is fun because if you understand polarities, you can pick up quickly where the blind spots are.
Well, and the core values of an organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Barry Johnson talks about that a lot, doesn't he? Sort of the values of your organization, and do you have pairs in there as well?
That's what really drives the organization. And so even Michelle and I, we have our core values, and we have some that are polarities, that we have to be vigilant about leveraging and managing as a company. Those are a couple of things to really pay attention to as you're moving forward. And I think that it makes a big difference.
And you talk about dynamic balance, which is just such a fascinating element there. What is dynamic balance, and how should a leader be trying to seek this out?
Well, that's one of the gifts of polarities. Once you understand how they all work, you realize that it is a tension that exists between two different, what appear to be opposite values or poles, but it's really the energy that sits between them that binds them together, and that is where the dynamic balance occurs. There's always going to be times in our personal lives and in our companies where we may have to over focus on one pole more than the other one. But what polarities teach you is it's got to be, you have to continuously move. You have to keep in motion, and you can't drop the other pole, 100%. And a great example is COVID. When COVID happened, like from a healthcare perspective, but all businesses, the essential workers, you had to focus and you had to be very directive and say, this is what we're going to do in this crisis situation. And so that was where we leaned, but then we can't stay there. Eventually we have to lean back over into participation again and engaging the workforce again. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And it's really interesting to even see what's happening around the world with that, even with some of the outputs of COVID, with the in office work or hybrid out of office work, so it teaches you always got to be dynamic, though. You can't be, it's not an either or, it's an and in both.
Yeah, I think it's about paying attention to where you're being drawn. Life is dynamic.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of life, right? So it is about doing that dance, and it's not going so far that you over focus to the point that you neglect the other point. But that you give the attention that you need to give while you're doing whatever you can to maintain as much of the positive benefit of the other pole as you possibly. So, when we work with people and they create a blueprint strategy for how they're going to leverage this, they have a number. The only polarity managed for us is inhaling and exhaling. That our body takes care of that. We don't have to worry about it. Thank goodness, right? Now, would you want to walk around going, inhale?
I think I'd forget. Yeah.
We don't want that. Thank goodness we got an automatic system here, right? And when it fails, we know. And then that's when I come in. No. But all other polarities, we have to be vigilant and we have to have action strategies to get those benefits. The benefits aren't just going to happen, but we may have 4 or 5 strategies listed out to get the benefit of that. And if I have to give my attention to my professional career, big project coming up, COVID, like, right, I got to focus here. I might not be able to do all the strategies to support my personal life, but I can choose 1 or 2 that will give me the most positive outcome possible so that I'm still getting benefit from that. I'm still receiving positive attributes of that part. And then when this loosens up and I can give more attention to the other side, then I get it more equal, right? But it's never 50-50. It's always a transition, right? You never know. Week to week, it's a balance. Some weeks are heavier in your personal life, especially if you have kids or activities or, right, like things like that. But then, like the next week might be a heavy professional kind of a component. Same thing in organization. Sometimes we need to lean into the team, and other times we need to tap into the individual strengths that individuals have in the organization, right? So, but it's about just kind of knowing when we're doing that and being vigilant and mindful to maintain the actions that will get us the biggest benefits, like innovation and tradition, right? When we really need to be innovative, let's do what do we got to do to maintain the core while we innovate.
It's such a fascinating field. How did you arrive here? What was your journey into the polarity field? How did you get here?
Well, we actually were very blessed in our work in healthcare, for many, many years. And healthcare is a very complex system. And we were trying to do transformational changes. And we started out with a model of we want to move from institutional practice to professional practice. We want to move from, one discipline to multidisciplines. Like we were always doing the from to concept. And that we were met with a lot of resistance over and over again. And then somewhere along the way in our work, we had a couple of people ask us, have you ever heard of Barry Johnson and his work on polarity management? And he had written that book in the early 90s. And finally, we're like, you know what? We're going to pick up the phone and find this guy. Well, it ended up he lived 30 minutes from our office. It was like, and so we actually met face to face with Barry, and then he worked with our team in the field for a number of years, uncovering common polarities in healthcare. And so that's how we got started, and we really applied it in the field. It shifted the way that we helped organizations transform. And then when Tracy and I, eventually over time, that work grew, but we also grew in different organizations in the work we were doing. And eventually it got to be more about other things and not about the culture work and the polarity work that we were so passionate about. And so in 2017, we decided to leave our corporate roles and kind of do our last stand on what we wanted to do. And we really sat back and thought about it. It was like, gosh, of all the things we've done, polarities are still not known. And even then how you work with them is even further from known. And that's really when we started MissingLogic.
Yeah. We were really blessed. And the work that we were doing in healthcare organizations was really around healthy cultures. And that's where the dialogue and relationship components came in, because we were creating infrastructures inside organizations to bring people together to increase staff engagement, to create a culture that would permeate the whole organization. And then we were working with organizations all across North America to do that as well. Where we worked was the lab. Everything was tested and tried where we worked and led. And it was really engaging in those elements that had the biggest difference in the culture. And then recognizing the challenges that we were facing were these polarities that, when you work with hundreds of organizations, you can see the patterns, right? And we had that benefit of engaging with leaders from all across North America. And we saw the pattern that some of these things are not problems we can solve, right? And that's where Barry really helped us to say, yeah, these are polarities. And then that became a fundamental component of the framework that we used and implemented in organizations all across the country. And it was the one thing that we still see, like when we left corporate and started to engage in organizations, you could see the same problems coming up over and over and over. And leaders and we would look at each other and go, oh my God, and right now this is a classic case. So we were doing work culture work over 30 years ago, and work cultures and healthy work environments are still an issue today.
And one of the things you're particularly driven by is sort of well-being in the healthcare sector as well. That's a perennial, is this persistent and enduring issue there? Why is it an issue in the profession, and how can Polarity support that?
Well, it's because we look at everything, we look at things again as a problem, and burnout is a huge issue in healthcare, and it's a huge issue in a lot of industries is what we're really uncovering, and it's looked at as a problem. So the pattern that we see is, you can't deny it. There's been tons of reports. It's validated over and over again in the literature. And the pattern that we see now is people want to fix the system or the organization. So again, it goes back to like, well, if we fix this, then we'll fix burnout. But really, well-being is such a great example of a polarity that both have to own it. The organization has to own it, but also at the personal level, we have to all be resilient and pay attention to our own well-being as well. So that's a big part of our work, especially when COVID hit and we recognized leaders we're going to need a lot of help. Is we just started working with leaders on how to have thriving, resilient, unstoppable, or be a true leader. And it all started with helping them to really recognize how to leverage those personal polarities. You know, Tracy talked about professional life and personal life, and there's so many others: caring for self, caring for others, activity and rest. There's so many polarities at a personal level that leaders have to learn how to leverage. And so and then there's such a connection. Again, there's just that connection between leaders being resilient and the organization being resilient. So you have to do both. And
I would say, what I'd add to that is, in healthcare, I think it's really prominent in healthcare because they are service oriented.
Yeah.
It's always about the patient or about the team, and so they sacrifice themselves for others. And it's almost indoctrinated in you as a health professional, as a leader. And so I think that's why it's so prominent in healthcare, because they're caregivers. They are there to serve, and they overemphasize the service component. So when it comes to caring for self and caring for others, it's always about caring for others. It's never about caring for me. And so again, right, they end up in the downside of that. And then what we've uncovered in working with leaders, just from any area, right, is they tend to do that as well. But there's these leadership norms that we operate by, the beliefs that we hold as leaders, right? You got to work hard to be successful. Got to be the last man out the door, last man off the field, every team first, right? Organization first. You know, some of those kinds of norms that we are indoctrinated with as we move up. We watch others, we observe how others are, right? And we follow that pattern. We don't even know we believe this, but we're living it every single day. So we overemphasize, again, the sacrifice for the professional life. And think about it, you know, we have that either or. I can't have both. I don't believe work-life balance is possible because we don't understand what it takes to have balance, that it's not about 50-50, it is dynamic. And you know, like, I don't know about you, but you know, I mean, when it's either have a career or have a family, go to school or backpack. Well, for us in the States, it's go to Europe and backpack or go to school, right? So, I mean, think about it. Like, you know, when you reach that point after you get through your high school years, there's a point that you have to choose. And often we look at it as either or. It's the same thing as you move into your professional career. It's either I have this or I have that. It's hard to have both. So we don't have that both and mindset.
What is it about your work that you find most fulfilling? Which bits really excite you?
Well, I think what's so exciting, and it has been for the last 30 years, certainly the last 7 years, is when the light bulbs go on. It's really exciting to be with a group of people that have never even been introduced to these concepts. And when they are, it's like, oh my gosh, I never even knew this was even possible. Tracy and I just did a keynote a few months ago to 250 leaders. And as we were walking off the stage, leaders were literally at tables going like this to us, the mind-blowing sign, the little emoji. And that's fulfilling because you know what? We have all been through organizational development, leadership development concepts, but it's time for a new one. And I really feel this is the time for polarity intelligence. And when you see people really grasp it, even more now, like it was such a great question you asked earlier, even more now than 10 years ago, 15 years, 20 years ago. That's very, very, very fulfilling when you see people, it resonate with people, and then having them want to learn more and apply it.
And is it the same for you, Tracy? Or
Yeah. And I like the individual work we do. Like we
Mhm.
coach individual leaders and we have a mastermind, we have some coaching programs. But what I find really fulfilling is when somebody turns their life inside out, totally change. Like we had a leader we were working with that was really, had COVID, long-term COVID, was burnt out, was at the end of their rope, over emphasizing their professional life, never doing anything for themselves. They were hardly even sleeping, and to grasp this concept that this is a both and, that improving and developing my personal life will actually help me be more effective and successful in my professional life, and to totally turn their life around. It just is amazing to see the impact. And it really, at the core of that, was the polarities, understanding polarities, understanding the tensions that they experience, understanding that both of these are equally important to me, having the highest quality of life, and to see them really step into that and develop that high quality of life. I mean, to go from sleeping 2 hours to 7 hours a night, to never going on vacation, to taking vacations, to going on retreats, to traveling, to, and getting a new offers, new opportunities, to see both aspects of their life just blossom, and to see them really thrive. It's just undescribable how exciting it is.
It's very fulfilling.
It is so fulfilling. It's just like, oh, and you just want every person to have that opportunity. That's all. We want people to not just know polarities exist, but just to apply the polarity intelligence in the place where it matters most to them. And for some people that is in their personal life. And for others, it is in their organizations, right? Mm-hmm. It is in how they lead. And we just want to give them the tools and the opportunities, the knowledge and the ability to apply it so that they can have this transformational results and sustainable results. Because that's the thing. Polarities are about sustainability, sustainable results that don't have to take a lot of energy, right? Once you understand what you're doing, it's just maintenance. It's vigilance and maintenance. It's not a heavy lift all the time and redoing things, right? Refocusing.
So on the flip side, what are the most challenging bits about the work that you do?
Well, I think the most challenging is people thinking this is just a nice to know. Great concept. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest challenge for us, because it isn't just interesting. It is essential. And everybody really will have a much better life. We'll have better communities. We'll have more, connection, engagement, more harmony in our lives if we can embrace this, understand it, and work with it collectively and individually. And I think that's the thing that is a little bit more frustrating for me. So it's really just kind of trying to help people to see it in their lives so that they grasp that it is more than just a night.
Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, can you?
Exactly.
Yeah. But it doesn't do any good to just see it. So what, right?
You're still going to get run over by the bus.
Exactly. You're still going to experience all those downsides, right? So what would you rather have? Would you rather have all the benefits and the joy and the positive energy, right? That when you just put a little bit of effort towards it, you can kind of create this space, be the creator of your life, be the creator of your outcomes, and have them over and over and over. Because it really is about creating that virtuous cycle that's just taking you towards that greater purpose, that thing that you truly want and desire. And most of us would rather stay in that, but you just have to do a little bit of effort to get to that.
When you look back over your careers, what would you say are some of the biggest lessons, or the biggest lesson you've learned so far?
Well, I would say one of the biggest lessons we've had over the last few years is really about being in partnership with somebody. So Michelle and I have been friends for almost 30 years, right? We've been working together for numerous years, collaborated on a lot of things, but we never owned a business together. We never were business partners together. And even though we know about polarities, really, it was really about understanding how those polarities show up in the dynamic of who we are as people and individuals. On almost every polarity, we hold the opposite pole as a preference. And so, there's been times over the last few years where we've experienced a lot of tension, and recognizing, oh my gosh, right? We're sitting in this polarity and We're both like, being our natural selves, emphasizing the poles that are our preference poles, where our strengths are. I mean, they're strengths, right? As well. They're not just values, they're strengths. And it's not that we don't value the other, but because it's our strength, we lean so far into it that we're not embodying the other. And so it's just really been how we can do that. So it doesn't matter if you're a partner, even with our spouses, right? We've had to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
But with each other, and we have a friendship and a business relationship that we have to manage, right? Both. So we have to give equal attention to both of those. But even for leadership dyads, leadership teams, right, where you're working closely with another person, co-leaders and a project, we got to really understand not only what your strengths are, but what are your preferences and what polarities are going to be at play, and just being more vigilant about, okay, we're going to be moving into this new effort. What are the polarities that are going to come up between our strengths? And how can we leverage that? Make sure we're proactively thinking about that, right? And leveraging that. So that's one of them.
And I would add to it, taking the dialogue Tracy and I have with each other and our relationship to even a deeper level.
The other thing is from a polarity perspective is that you really have to have the foundation of the relationships and the meaningful dialogue. You can see the polarities, but to actually live in the tension within a team or within a group, you really have to have that foundation, develop that foundation of relationship, and leverage those tools of meaningful dialogue to because that tension going to keep showing up, right? And to leverage it and manage it, and to keep that eye on the greater purpose. It's just essential. It is not enough to just know that a polarity exists or that we have polarities. To manage them, you've got to do that work. And historically, that's been the soft stuff, right? Like,
right.
You don't want to spend a lot of time investing in relationships and communication, right? Let's get the productivity pieces done, right? So, but it's equally important in all aspects of our.
Yeah, and another way, I just want to say another way that shows up to what Tracy says so important is it can't just be a token team building day. You know what I mean? You have to bake that relationship and dialogue into your organization, just like you do the awareness of polarities. That's what we know will make the biggest difference.
It's got to be woven into the fabric.
Because I think when you do talk about this, and it's a key element of your work, polarities, therefore you end up holding yourself to a higher standard, don't you? So when there is an issue, you feel there's a sense of responsibility to work it through, isn't it? And it'll often appear in all sorts of unusual places, but you have to make the space to work through it, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
And you have to invite it. You have to invite it. And sometimes I think, oftentimes we're driven by fears. And polarities are so much about that, right? We hang on to our preference pole because we're afraid we're going to lose the value of what we highly, of our preference, or what is a significant value for us. We hang on to it so tightly because we're afraid we're going to lose it if the other pole is given attention. And that's where the resistance comes from. It's really fear. And maybe we've had an experience where we lived in the downside of that other pole, and we're not going there again. I'm not going back there. You're not making me do that, right? And so you just hang on and hang on and hang on. But it's not about, I have to let go of this. It's about, how do I complement this with the other? How can we have both? And that's why it's so important to have the dialogue. Is to understand, help people to see where their fears are coming from, and that it's not either or, but either or is all we tend to know. And that's what drives those fears. So really having that space to, let's all just talk about, what are you most concerned about? And oftentimes when you're working with a polarity, it's going to that place first. It's not about your pole and what you believe. It's about understanding the other person. What's important to you? What are you most concerned about? And just really understanding and recognizing and accepting the value, the positives of the pole they hold most dearest. It's not about pushing your perspective. It's about understanding theirs. And that's where the dialogue really helps, and the relationships help. And you have to invite the other pole, even if it's not your preference pole.
Obviously, you are very accomplished in your careers. How do you invest in your own learning and development?
Well, one way is we have our own podcast, right? The True Leader podcast. And I think one of the great benefits of that is inviting other people on, right? And reading their books. So we invite somebody out. We're like, we get exposed to people and we're like, oh my gosh, look at this incredible book. Well, we read their books, we do our homework, right? And then we learn so much from them. So I think that's just been like phenomenal for us. We have learned a lot about boundaries from Dr. Sasha Shilcutt. She was on our podcast. We've learned about grit. We've learned about even improv, leveraging improv, right? And improv is really, there's a lot of strong relationship between polarities and improv. Yes, and
I think the other way is really, we've always known this, but I think we've really put it on steroids now, recognizing how important it is that each of us individually go through personal development. We're all here to evolve. We're all here to grow. And just because Tracy and I have been friends for a long time, we came together to start a business, it doesn't mean we have to stop our own personal development. And just, even thinking about your podcast, you guys, organizational development, the other pole is personal development. So how we grow and evolve is we're always, okay, what's showing up for me that might be uncomfortable that I've got to walk through. I have to continue personally develop. And we do that individually, but we also do it in our partnership as well. So just the commitment for that continuous evolution of who we are as people.
Yeah. And we coach and we are coached. We have
Yes.
a number of coaches.
Yes.
So that's another way
Yes.
that we kind of continue to grow and evolve, is to be a part of masterminds, groups of people that are being coached, and then to have our own individual.
What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out and thinking they want to kind of introduce polarities into the work they're doing?
Call us.
Read the book.
Read the
book. Seriously, do reach out. We have our website, MissingLogic.com. And also on our podcast, we're very intentional on our podcast, whether we have guests or Tracy and I do a lot of solo episodes. We talk a lot about the concepts of polarity intelligence in a lot of different light so that people can really continue to understand it at a deeper level. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I would say start with the book, because the book is very simple. It's very comprehensive. And then take the tools, go to the Polarity Intelligence website and get the tools and do the work. Don't just read the book, start to do the work. This is my soapbox, right? Do the work, use the tools. And again, start with yourself. Just start with work and home. Start with your professional life, your personal life, or whatever it is that you're feeling that will give you the biggest outcome right now at this point in your life. Maybe that's caring for yourself and caring for others. Maybe that's activity and rest, whatever it is. Do the work of starting to move through that, creating your own, map around that, your own blueprint around that. Do your own work. Think about, where am I in my relationships? Like, how healthy are my relationships? Where do I engage in meaningful dialogue? Where can I do that more? And I think just starting with yourself, and then always one of the other ways is just to keep asking the question, is this a problem or is it a polarity? Mm-hmm. And if you use that as a fundamental question every time that you run into a challenge, you will start to develop that muscle of identifying and differentiating between problems and polarities. And I think that's one of the cornerstones, right? And then use yourself as a practice field until you begin to feel like you can talk to others, and then start with a group that you have psychological safety with. Yeah. That you aren't afraid to maybe make a couple mistakes in how you're saying it, or not say it, explicitly, but so just practice the saying of it, talking about what they are, trying to map them out. Get a group that you feel psychologically safe with, that you can practice with once you feel comfortable with what you're doing.
And it is such a good book. It's, I think, of all the books on my Kindle, it's the most read by me, and you can just keep picking it up and going back into little bits of it as well. And every time you read it, there's more tactics that just make you go, oh my. And I think if I'm thinking about things I'm taking away from the conversation, and things that I've used quite a lot, is helping people have the tools to explore other people's perspectives. We just make so many assumptions so much, don't we? And there's one thing you said there, which is taking the time to understand, why does someone have that preference? just asking questions like that changes the game completely, doesn't it? It helps you understand them in much more detail, but it also really encourages you to talk much more clearer. And then when the question comes back to you, it just breaks down those barriers that we have between people as well.
Yeah, and just holding that both and mindset, right? Just holding the fact that if this, and not every conflict or every challenge is a polarity, right? But when you know there's an interdependency, then it's always both and. So it's about complementary. It's not about either or. And just holding that mindset, I think, is really helpful when you're.
But it's like the gym. You've got to do the reps. You've got to keep
Yes,
practicing.
exactly.
There's no shortcuts around it.
No, there is no shortcut to that. But the more you do it, right, the stronger the muscle, the more readily you're able to see it. But if you don't practice that, then you can't just do it up here. You got to start to verbalize it, and you got to start to kind of map things out. And I think the book is a great place to start with.
All of the references that Michelle and Tracy have shared with us today. So podcast, which is brilliant. I've listened to it in the gym many times. I do associate you with pain now because I listen to it so much.
Well, I think you should associate us with activity and then some rest.
Yes.
And the gain, the pain and the gain.
And the gain. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. It is really good. The podcast is brilliant. The book is really just a fantastic resource, and the website as well. There's loads of resources. So all of that is in the show notes today. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
Oh, lots and lots of things. I think I love what you said about knowing your own preference polls and kind of articulating those of your own and your teams. I think if teams kind of articulated that and did that, so powerful just to have that in the foreground of whatever you're doing. Prioritizing space for dialogue, overemphasize how important that is, and then just always be kind of active strategies for getting the balance right on all the polls that we're working with.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle and Tracy. In the 20 years I've been working with Polarities, you have given the most crisp definition I've seen as well. So thank you so much. And thanks for making time as well, particularly just before Christmas is when we're recording it. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd love it if you hit the like button. We'd love it if you go over to the MissingLogic podcast as well. And please do follow that and subscribe to it as well. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe it and also share this podcast with other people who think that might find it useful as well. There are so many people in the field that might want to be introduced to the idea of polarity intelligence, and that will start them on the journey with Michelle and Tracy as well. Michelle and Tracy join our brilliant collection of practitioners from across the world, but you are first, is it a Michigonian? What are you from Michigan?
Michigander.
Michiganians.
So welcome. Thank you for that. We've loved it. It's been brilliant. It's such a great way to end the year for us as well. So thank you. Thank you for making time for us as well. And we just so much luck with your brilliant venture and helping transform the world one organization at a time.
Thank you.
It's just been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Been wonderful.
Such joyful. Great way to end our week and our year as well.
Yes.
So thank you.